welcome to Agile Clips. In this episode, we talk about people that bring Agile practices to teams and due to limited knowledge or the wrong motivation make things worse. We discuss how to identify these people, which leads to a discussion about agility and how to recognize when a team is truly agile. Hi Santosh, hi Andrew, how are you?
Hey guys.
Hey,
Good to
how are
see
you
you. It's
guys?
been a while.
Nice. Yeah.
Excellent.
Happy New Year to you guys,
Oh,
even
it's
though we
been
are
that
already
long.
in it.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, Happy New Year to you and Happy New Year to anybody listening to us in as
Yeah.
February begins. Love it. And happy Valentine's Day in that case as well there.
Yeah.
We had discussed beforehand this topic of people who are well-intentioned and have some experience of Agile and try and bring it to an organization, but they don't really know what they're doing, and it's very counterproductive usually. An example that I came across very recently with two folks in the organization where I work, and we have pockets of Agile, but it's not widely used. And we have a program manager who joined recently, and his superior who also joined recently, and they've both used Scrum in other organizations. So they've come in guns blazing, trying to introduce at least some aspects of Scrum, but really doing a poor job of it in a way that's just been really bad for the organization. So one example was introducing Scrum to a DevOps team that really is fighting fires a lot of the time and whose work is not predictable, and for whom Kanban would have been a much better choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then another example is just getting the team to do a retrospective, which I absolutely support, but it was done so poorly. Team members were asked to provide some input, but then after a couple of minutes, it was the program manager just talking for the next hour, practically speaking, about issues and so on. So people know about the different events or ceremonies, but they really don't know how to apply them and how to really get the team to benefit and participate more. Anyway, those experiences made me think of this topic. And then as we discussed it, I heard that, Santosh, you also have come across some of these Agile imposters recently.
Yeah, and in a couple of my previous clients that I was there, I think what, as you were mentioning earlier, they came in as Scrum Masters, and then they were crowned as Agile coaches.
Oh,
So all of a
nice.
sudden, they had this big sword in their hand of Agile coaching, and they were whatever they had as a experience or limited knowledge, they started wielding that against coaching. And then somebody, I think, had told them that, oh, coaches should be observers, but they were just observing. For 6 months, they just observed. No, the teams were like, does the Sphinx speak anytime or no? And, it was like, basically, they were pretty scared how to give the advice because they had limited exposure. But, since they were in the process for 5-10 years, they didn't realize what it scale up means, go to the next level. And then they started giving the advice or voicing their opinions. That's when people realize, oh, there is something else under that sheep's skin. and basically, the organization started getting hurt, and Agile started getting the bad name out of all this. So then we had to actually go in and start cleaning up, and that's what we were doing in my last two assignments. And I think the other challenge that we saw was that once somebody has been trained or given that direction, it's very difficult to make them unlearn some bad habits.
Yeah.
And so I think the imposters can be, very self-serving from that point of view, but then
Yeah.
the effect lingers long time.
Yeah.
And so that, spotting that sooner and rectifying that sooner is I think it's very key.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
totally agree.
painful, isn't it?
That's the concern, that it just gives Agile a bad name, when in fact it's not
Yep.
really Agile.
No, it's got nothing to do with it. Absolutely. It's funny. I was saying how I didn't feel qualified to speak about this, really, as a gag on imposter syndrome, which is a different thing. Imposter syndrome is that experience that you feel permanently like you're underqualified and you're about to get caught out.
Hmm.
And that's a dysfunction that I've seen, in so many corporate situations. And I think it's a result of an education and a employment hierarchy that's based on qualification. You know, you work very hard to get your degree, and your degree implies that you now know everything, particularly if you get a good one, and you're employed to know what you're doing. And the next thing you know, you're actually in a workplace where everything's brand spanking new and you're working on stuff that nobody's worked on before. And you've got a boss that's giving you grief for not being able to give a good estimate. What do you mean? You're supposed to know what you're doing. Why can't you give me an estimate? And it just leads to this awful, awful feeling that people have that they are imposters. Now, that's a little different from what you're describing, which is really, it's kind of a combination of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where if you don't know that you don't know what you're doing, you tend to have great confidence. And if you are a very skilled expert, you're much more likely to be cautious and hedge what you're up to. But it's also a function of the Peter principle that, again, in most corporate life, being promoted is a big deal. But managing to maintain status is so important that even if you get promoted into a role that you're not competent at, and may then slip into the imposter syndrome I was describing, who's ever going to ask to be demoted? Especially if they're not even aware that what they're up to is actually a bad version of something that was supposed to be working. I get how people like that can actually genuinely believe they're doing the right thing and be terrified by the fact that it's not producing the outcomes they thought it was supposed to produce. But what's going to happen if they acknowledge that? If they acknowledge it, they'll be in trouble, and, it's a horrible trap to be in. I really get it.
And I think that's the biggest challenge. I mean, that's what the imposter syndrome really exemplifies. That is, people are not ready to accept the failure.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I think it really takes a different uh, mindset to think about failure is part of this learning, and we are moving, and accepting and declaring, yes, we fail. It is so when the first time I remember, me and my colleagues we really went there, and then what we were trying to accomplish did not, and we said, oh, this experiment failed, we need to pivot, and these are the pivots we are going to use. People were like, don't admit that. Like, no, we want to admit that. And I think the EVP at that time said, you guys are the bravest people that I've ever seen. I'm more ready to trust in you than anybody else here.
Yeah.
So I think that's the interpersonal, organizational environment creating that sense.
Well, doesn't that just speak so badly of the unintentional consequences of the ways of thinking that have led to most organizations being organized the way they are, where people just, because of this belief that they're supposed to know what they're doing, an admission of failure isn't an acknowledgement that they're getting negative data. it feels like it's a failure of self for which they'll be judged and probably fired and sanctioned. This is why the first big breakthrough moment in my career in this stuff was when I was first taught Agile as a Scrum Master, and it was like, oh my God, you can actually do this. I got it. The second one was when I was taught Cynefin, the Cynefin sense-making framework, and how that helps to distinguish the difference between domains that are ordered, where you can know what you're doing, and expertise is applicable, as opposed to domains which are complex, which means that they are emergent, that the constraints on them are a bit slippery. And it means that the only way you can really move out of complex domains, if you want to do so, which is what most businesses are trying to do, they're trying to go from complex situations to something that they can predict and monetize, right? The safe way to do that is by using multiple, preferably parallel, safe to fail experiments. Safe to fail. So if you have a culture that sanctions failure as somehow meaning that if you failed at something, you are a lesser mortal and should not be amongst the gods that walk in this building, of course you're going to get up to some damn fool behavior to try and stay out of trouble. Sorry, I get a little bit animated about this, as you can probably hear. But I have so much empathy for people around this because it's just a function of being creatures that evolved to only be good at really an environment where you're surrounded by the same relatively small number of people the whole time, so you can completely trust what they are saying to you because they've been in that environment, the same as you, forever, hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And that change is cyclical and so is kind of predictable. That change is daily, or with the cycle of the moon or the cycle of the sun. We're all right with that, and we've developed some other mechanisms for dealing with things that show up unexpectedly. We've got the threat response to, be on the safe side to make sure that we try and survive situations. But, smart creatures that us humans are, we went and civilized ourselves to the point that we live in right now, where we're not working with the same people who are passing on institutional knowledge that is generations deep. If you're more likely to be somewhere where people are thinking out to the next quarter, you're not around a cyclical environment. The environment changes the whole time. That awful expression, VUCA, is a good indicator of just what the world has turned into. Now, if you know all of that, then you can start to appreciate why something like Agile, understood and applied well, is so clever, because it is a way of going, well, let's do the least possible, highest value thing that we can right away and find out if we're right. And if we're not, well, no harm done, or at least a little harm done, and we'll try something else. As opposed to, oh my God, we put 2 years into this, spent $20 million, and it's a failure. Well, we better sack everybody straight away and save face.
No, I was just going to go back to the original point, which is how, if you have an organization where there are people who think they know something and maybe there's nobody around them that knows better to be able to correct the behaviors. So just how do you detect this kind of problem, and how do you rectify it?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the same thing that when you see people confidently marketing themselves as somebody that they are not, or and nobody else around them knows about it, and somebody has gone to some conference or read some book and say, we should do this, or McKinsey might have come in and say, you should do Agile, that's why you need to be this way, and then and the order decree comes down. But I think that's where I'm seeing that sometimes the commitment is made at the highest level or somewhere there, and then people have just to fall in line. So the previous, project-minded people get into with the new labels all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
and they start saying, "Yeah, that's what we used to do." And one of the things that they started seeing is that, oh, our previous coach did not say these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, well, what was it that they were telling you to do? Because I'm seeing, and especially the place that I was working before, they were looking for some checklists.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, you need another PMBOK? So,
Yeah.
there is a project manager's book of knowledge, kind of. You want to have
Yes.
another Agile book or something?
Yeah.
And, that's where really Xenophon's
Cynefin.
principle, when
Cynefin.
I,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, Canavan,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always make, but anyway,
I know.
so what I was trying to do was started looking at some of the constraints. They were saying, "Oh, we can't do this. It's so, I know there are so complications and there are so constraints here." So the people who were non-agilists trying to do it, they wanted to stay in those constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So that because they knew how that works, so
Yeah.
they were trying to fit agile into that, and that's why we could say, "Oh, wait a minute." So then I started asking them. I said, even the constraints are two type of constraints. One is a process constraint, and there is the one is an environment constraint. And we could start looking at it from agile perspective, how to handle it. Anything that is complicated can be automated.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's complex, you
Mm-hmm.
can experiment and figure out, and that gets evolved. So that was a completely different concept. And like that's what the true agility bases the things around.
Yeah.
And they're like, nobody taught us that. And I'm like, well, that's
No.
the
Yeah.
oh,
It's often presented as a process shift that's a panacea for everything. Yeah, process is involved, but typically what actually needs to shift underneath, it's a cultural thing, right? Which is another way of saying environmental. And you've got to come
mhm.
at that a little bit sideways. You might come at it through process. You can use process as like the gateway drug to this stuff. But you're right that if you have people who are consciously or not very invested in their qualifications and their previous knowledge, it really takes something to have them not feel invalidated by being offered something that's different. It's terribly easy when you show somebody something new. To you, it's exciting. To them, what they've just heard is that they've just been told that they're doing it wrong, and they've invested way too much to actually acknowledge that there's any possibility of that. God damn it, I'm not wrong. Who are you calling wrong?
Well, I
I
know
get it.
that's
I
another
get it.
thing. What I was just looking at as to what are the signs that
Mm-hmm.
this person is or this group is having that imposter syndrome. When I start looking at those uh, anti patterns start emerging,
Yeah.
and that starts telling you that, oh, somebody is not really understanding what the intention of this whole agility is, and they're
Yeah.
just looking at it from a uh, series of steps that has to be conducted.
Yeah.
And man, those are the kinds of things I'm seeing that tells you, okay,
What
now
do you
here
think's the
is
very first clue? You walk in and meet a new team or something. What I I know what gives me the first clue, but I'm curious to hear from you guys. What's the first thing that has you go, ooh, this isn't going so well?
I think there are several
see.
things. One could be like there's no backlog. So some of the fundamentals are missing and nobody pointed it out. And so that could be one way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think just observing the team dynamics, if people are not sort of happy and passionate about what they're doing, that's also a sign that they're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
Just a
How
couple
about
One
of
you,
of the other
Scott?
thoughts.
things, yeah, one of the other things I always look for is a incremental or working product. Does your product work at every cadence, incrementally? And what does that mean to you? So it all comes down to that as to how often and how complete you are able to deliver the product, increments of products. So if that is not working, then whatever the process that is going on behind the scenes and principles and all that, it really, there is no value being generated.
Well, that's very true. I think the first sign that I look for, and Steve hinted at it, is the mood. That if you're dealing with people who are clearly not happy, or who are scared and suppressing things, or who have no awareness of why their work is useful or important or beneficial, that to me is like the very first clue that things aren't going well. If you talk to people and they go, oh yeah, I know why we're doing what we're doing, I don't even need them to actually be that passionate. But if they're turning up and doing good work and know why, it's like, oh, okay, that's, yeah, you know what kind of contribution you're making. So you're much more likely to contribute to it and to not do work that doesn't contribute to it. Whereas people in the other states are probably putting more energy into surviving and getting through their days. And a symptom of that, Santosh, is exactly what you're saying, that there's not useful working tested product showing up that's of any value to anybody. It's
exactly
right. The financial value shows up right at the end. That's it's used early, but it comes back late. So you've got to look
the other
for other
thing,
things.
Other sign is I generally ask. I'll start with the leadership and ask them as to what does agility mean to you.
Yeah.
And their answers can tell you exactly what's happening down in the next layers down below. Because if they say, oh, if we give them our view and everything, and they run the agile and they deliver, like, now you know where the changes have to be. And that's, as you said, the culture, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
One of my friend, really, Chris Sims, he had made a suggestion that, if you start working with the leadership and ask them to be agile, in the sense you actually do their work, their jobs in agile manner, then it becomes like they can actually say, instead of do as we say, they can say do as we do. And that's where a lot of these messages, and then people just giving the lip service and all that starts, so going completely gets weeded out, because now you're making a good and a very strong statement that it's not just the commitment doesn't mean that you will fund your agility. Actually, we are doing things.
That's so true, because if it just comes down as a mandate from above, that immediately causes stupid behavior. It has people, again, in a situation like that, well, we better, otherwise we'll be in trouble. But it also means people are able to do it going, well, it wasn't my idea, it was his idea. If it all goes horribly wrong, it's nothing to do with me. There's much less investment. Whereas if, as you say, the management is actually leading by example, much easier then to be like, well, it works for us, guys. Why don't you give it a shot? We'll support you. Make it an invitation, I mean, making it into an invitation has become yet another of the thoughtless formulae that you hear about, but like anything like that, at some point it was absolutely right. It was absolutely true that if you invite people to do things, particularly when the invitation also lets them see what might be possible for them, where there might be new opportunities for them to take action that would be of benefit to them and others, much more likely that that'll work out well than just telling people what to do, right?
And then, it creates a pull. instead of
Yes.
something being pushed down their throat. So now people are more interested. It's like, hey, if our bosses are doing it, there must be a value around that. I better get onto that and really
Yes.
get to know what this is. So that's a
Yes.
push-pull kind of thing. And then uh, the root cause of this imposter syndrome that gets, then
Yeah.
people
It goes
can
away.
be
Yes.
open. Yeah, and
Yes.
basically there is no incentive to be imposter then.
Yes. Imposter syndrome kicks in when people cannot say, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right? When it actually
exactly,
becomes something where people can go, I don't know. Does anybody know? Can we find out?
exactly,
That, I mean,
exactly.
once again, I find myself tempted to say, well, there you go. That's agility in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about this before. Is that how do you know whether people are really agile mindset or not? It's like at any level, at the team level or at the mid managers or leadership level, if you can see that people ask for help,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of, because offering help is very easy, asking for help is, you feel safe around there, and you can feel vulnerable and still say that nobody's going to put a knife in your back, and
Yes.
that's the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. There's your imposter syndrome in a nutshell. That if you can't risk looking like this imagined failure, you can't even dare ask for help.
Exactly.
Right? So you're right. It's a good symptom, and it's something which, if you can reward people for asking for help, and even better, give them some help,
Hmm.
that's you're starting to. That's a kind of a cultural shift. And all I mean by culture is, how do we do things around here? Well, we do things around here by encouraging people to acknowledge that if they're doing something they've never done before, they probably don't know how to do it. So they're going to have to figure it out, and they'll probably do that best if they do it collaboratively with others,
Correct. Hmm.
asking them for help, giving help, scratching their heads,
Well,
trying
that's the
things. Yeah.
collective ownership, so that
Yeah.
everyone feels that everyone has their back, so that
Yes.
they don't feel threatened by going into uncharted territories.
Yes. And you can't push collective ownership. If you try and tell everybody they now own it, the chances are they're going to be going, "Uh oh, I'm in trouble."
Yeah.
But if you can go, we actually think that we're going to do something which is going to be massively appreciated by our customers, by our shareholders, by our neighbors, by our suppliers. We think this is something that is really, really worth doing. So, what's the least that we can do to figure out if we're right or not and get that done right away? Who's going to help me with that? That's when
Yep.
you're more likely to have people go, oh, I'll give that a shot. That's all right. There's your collective ownership,
Exactly. Exactly.
right?
And I think the
Totally
other
different.
thing is then innovation starts. You know,
Yeah.
people are encouraged to do the innovation, and I think
Yes.
that's the other aspect of imposter side of things is people don't want to innovate them because they are trying
Great.
to push everything under the rug so that there is no chance of taking any chance or going out of their
Yeah.
comfort zone.
Yeah. I've even seen great agile thinking turn into non innovation because the we don't know, let's find out led to people actually understanding that what they thought they were going to do wasn't going to help.
Hmm.
So it was kind of good. It was, that assumption that, all innovation is good innovation. They challenged it. It's like, well, why do we think this is a good idea? What's the least we can do to find out if we're right,
Right, and then
And they did.
that's
Yeah.
the are we able to even imagine pivoting?
Yeah.
I think that's the whole idea. That how are we going to find out whether this really works or it doesn't, and then we can move to
Yeah.
the different direction. Also, when people actually started thinking about how to manage the failures
Mm-hmm.
and in a
Mm-hmm.
more positive direction as to failure is a learning, and that's a data point into our path that,
Mm-hmm.
oh, If you put the, your hand on the hot stove, it burns.
Yeah,
That's the kind of. So I
yeah.
think that is
And who did
where,
that? Who did that?
yeah,
You did that. Are you willing to be responsible for the fact that you just burnt your hand?
yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
That kind of you're right. That kind of responsibility. I mean, it's one of the scary things about being in such a fast-moving world. The thing about anything that's complex is the only thing you can be certain of is that something unforeseeable will happen.
Correct.
So that's why you want to do these safe to fail experiments and monitor them over time, because there'll be unforeseeable things. I mean, look at dear old Facebook. Back in the early days, that was the shining future. They founded it with this wonderful vision of how it would bring the world together, what kind of change there would be. And now look at it. And there is apparently very little willingness to be responsible for the harm that it's caused. That's reckless innovation, long-term reckless innovation. And I think it's part of, I'm liking very much seeing that it's like there's a second wave within the Agile movement of people going, oh, you know what? It's not just about getting to market quickly. It's not just about pivoting. It's also about tracking this. Are we
Exactly.
doing something that's responsible? Short-term thinking, very painful.
Hmm.
Thinking out into
Hmm.
just the next quarter. I'm hearing more and more people talking about seventh generation thinking, which is fantastic. How will we be thought of 7 generations from now?
Interesting.
Which for it's fantastic, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
most finance departments in most big businesses would have their heads burst at the very thought of it. If we don't meet
Yeah.
market expectation at the end of Q1, we're all in trouble. Well,
Exactly.
yes, but you've accidentally left this trail of, well, I mean, the worst of it is things like the climate crisis.
So we started with team dysfunctions due to one person. Then we went on to
And look what
agile
happened.
culture and all these
Yeah.
topics. But I was actually reminded as we were thinking about how do you recognize that there's a problem.
Yeah.
It reminded me of our very first podcast, episode number 1, where we talked about Henrik Nyberg's Scrum checklist.
Yeah.
And it does, looking at it, it does offer as the bottom line, delivering working tested software every 4 weeks or less, delivering
Yeah.
what the business needs most,
Yep.
and processes continuously improving. Those are the key elements,
Yes.
Yeah.
which we
Yeah.
kind of
Yes.
touched on in various ways. So,
About or what gives me that goosebumps is that in so many ways it manifests itself into those principles, and every time you just go down there and it's like, oh, if we would have just looked at it, it's like, instead of doing this huge documentation, just get a feedback, talk to them directly. It could have saved so many millions of dollars or so many different blood, sweat, and tears. It just that simple. And
Yeah.
people just completely lose the sight of it.
It's funny that you mention Henrik Nyberg, who I've long massively admired. I mean, his um, product management in a nutshell is still a great place to start almost any agile training. It's just fantastic. But it's also perfect bringing him up right now when Spotify are catching it in the neck for having revealed themselves as only really being in it for the money.
Mm.
And Henrik no longer works for them. He left them some time ago. He works for Mojang now, who are the people behind Minecraft. He's actually one of the Minecraft developers. And when you look at Minecraft's incredible success and the enormous following, in the gaming industry, I have to say I see that as being the kind of shift that I applaud. Someone actually much more interested in contributing to a global cultural shift of people being able to really add to the quality of their life, which playing a game like Minecraft absolutely does. It's an extraordinary, fantastic game, as opposed to working for a company that nominally is there to support music, But when you ask almost any musician how much money they make out of Spotify, it's a pittance. And this whole farrago just recently has made it abundantly clear that Spotify is yet another company that used Agile in service not of the general good, but of their investors' good, which is a very
Mhm.
harsh opinion. I get it, and I get that you guys may not share that opinion. It's not necessary. It's my opinion. It's not this podcast's opinion. But like I say, it's another example of you have to be really careful. This Agile's a tool, and it can be used to cause great harm as well as to cause great good. At the very least, it can cause a lot of good in terms of making people's working lives beneficial, better than tolerable, actually rewarding and fulfilling. But I'm very eager to encourage all Agilists to think about the much wider implications of the companies that they work for. You know, I mean, Santosh, you were saying that your employers have been cleaning up their act and they are clearly proud to do so, and you're proud to work for them. Yeah, let's have some more of that, please. That would be good. You know,
Exactly, exactly.
right?
And I think that's where the true cultural shift starts happening.
Yes, it is, and it saddens me when I hear the stories of people who are operating in such a way that they end up being revealed and labelled as imposters because they were probably doing the best they could. But what a terrible thing that, as you were saying, Steve, how do you detect that? How do you detect that well-meaning people are actually doing something that is possibly not beneficial?
Hmm.
So I think that's a good fundamental question. I learnt, alas, probably too late in my career, that one of the first things you have to ask people is how will you know? If you're employed to, the CEO wants to go agile, so they get the agile coaches in, deploy the coaches. It's an IT thing, isn't it? Something to do with dev. It's still really important to be able to go, well, how will you know that that's a benefit to you? How will you know
Hmm.
in the short term and the medium term and the long term? What will be different? Because I've often found that when you get down to asking those questions, you get a blank look. Oh, I just thought Agile was supposed to get us to market quicker.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, you funny you should mention this because I think there was a broadcast or one of the meetups I had. There was this postcard from the future.
Mm-hmm.
If you start asking the question to the leadership, saying, what would your postcard in next year would look like?
Mm.
And that tells you where their head is
Mm-hmm.
and what the real problem or real vision that they are looking for. Sometimes it doesn't get articulated to the next level down
Mm.
or even further down, and or it gets lost in translation. So people do, as you were saying, do their best to their abilities,
Yep.
and that's where all the smoking mirrors and things like that
Yes.
start.
Yes. Yes. And it's always tempting to put it down to malice and conspiracy. I think it's much more normal for it to be a case of a lack of awareness or lack of competence that actually tends to lead to dysfunction.
And well, I think the other part that we were going to talk about was that how do you start fixing it? And it almost like you might have to go to those people and say, what's stopping you from doing the right thing?
Well, you know, I'd be very careful asking that because it's funny as you said it. I was like, oh, if you ask somebody what's stopping you from doing the right thing, are they going to go, I'll take that question seriously, or are they going to go, sod off? What do you mean not doing the right thing? Of course I'm trying to do the right thing. How dare you? And you've lost connection. I think the
And
key is to care about people. To go look. What is it you're trying to accomplish here? What really matters to you? Because I'm noticing that it looks like you're not happy and you're not getting what really matters to you. Let's find out a bit more about that. Because if you can make that kind of connection, you might find people actually starting to open up to you. Because otherwise, they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, or they're going to worse yet kill you off and just dismiss you. That's been my experience.
you're right. You need to
Yeah.
be a little more articulate about how to ask that question.
Yeah, and
But
at
the bottom
8:30
line is what,
after a long day, I get that we sometimes default to the slightly less elegant way of putting things. I get that. Yeah.
but I think the crux of it is get to the bottom of why they are not, or why are they doing what they are doing,
Yes.
and that can lead to a lot more, like 5 whys kind of deeper understanding of
Yeah.
where that is coming from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the on the surface behavior that somebody exhibits is one thing. What's going through their mind while they're doing it is another thing. And why those things would be going through their mind is a third thing. And unless you're operating at the very minimum with some kind of awareness or at least radar looking for all three of those, you're probably not going to be operating on anything that will actually make a difference. And that's where coming at it as a process problem is at best relatable to people who believe it's all about process, but ultimately won't make the difference. That unless you get into that whole what's motivating people and why would they have that motivation, that's why this coaching thing is difficult. That's why somebody that's done a 2-day Scrum Master program knows a little bit about process, but they are not a coach. I mean,
Exactly.
all of us have been
Exactly.
paying attention to this for many years. I know other coaches who are still training who are, their work is a damn sight closer to psychotherapy than it is to process management,
Definitely.
Funny you should mention this. It's really one of the clients I was. You are doing psychoanalysis of my team.
Yeah,
I'm like, exactly. I didn't even
yeah,
know that I was doing it, but I said, you know what? That is what is really required to understand what is the psyche of your team to be able to get the best out of them.
yeah.
And when I was talking to Jeff Sutherland, somebody asked him, they're like, so what is this agile thing? Can you tell us? Like, he said, nothing but how people should work together.
Yes,
That's the bottom line.
yes,
And, you can put all the other tools around it, which is fine.
yes,
But it's actually how we get people to work together
yes.
in a most productive way.
Yeah, I'm going to quote that introductory line of the manifesto again. I can't help myself. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. We,
Precisely. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
collaborative. Are, it's in the present all the time. Uncovering, it's there to be uncovered if you just know how to have situational awareness and pay close attention. Better, well, how do you know it's better? It's never going to be best. How do you know it's better? Measured how and for whom? Better ways? What are the ways? I don't know. You might have to uncover them. Somebody else might have uncovered them, but let's have a look. In this situation, what are the ways? And it's not actually about just developing software. I mean, the original signatories acknowledged that very quickly after they wrote it. It's about working. It's almost about living. We're uncovering better
Exactly.
ways of working by doing it, right? By actually
Learning.
being the practitioners and helping others do it, which goes back to the whole collaborative thing. And that thing that actually the best way to get whatever you want out of life is to help other people get what they want out of life, right?
Yeah.
I love that first line. And when you actually do, the next line is through this work, we have come to value blah, 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 blah. Well, if you don't do that work, if you don't do the work of collaboratively uncovering better ways and helping others, those values are meaningless. Those principles are meaningless. They're just things that you learn and nod along to and go, oh, yes, well, we'll be good if we stick to those. We'll be bad if we don't. You haven't got under it. You're not generating what's actually at the core of creating good stuff in the world, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, I've been up and down on my soapbox all evening tonight, haven't I? Gosh.
I think that would be a great place to end the podcast. So it was, I think, an interesting topic.
Yes.
We went all over the place in a good way and sort of came back to some fundamentals. So thank you for being here and having the discussion, and best wishes to all our listeners. Hope you enjoyed it.
If there's anybody out there that thinks that they are an imposter and they're suffering from imposter syndrome, well, just make sure you're doing it properly. That's my advice to you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.